right, so welcome to Salon D Art. Today we will be talking about land art. My name is Elizabeth Goodwill and I'm the Education Director here at Art Center Sarasota, and my co-host today is Judy Just, who will introduce herself now.
Hi, my name is Judy Just. I'm an artist and I'm an instructor at the Art Center. I teach printmaking.
Thank you, Judy. All right, and today is land art is our topic, and we're going to be talking about the land art movement, not to be confused with art that is made of land or whatnot. So we're going to kind of go into the definition of this. And I have a number of videos for us to watch this time. So we can kind of understand where the artists were coming from, different viewpoints, and working on large scale. Here we go. Oh, wrong way.
I like Troublemakers, the story of land art.
I know, right?
Yeah.
There are no values attached to something like this because it's not portable and then not a malleable barter exchange object. And that does it. You can't trade this thing. You can't put it in your pocket. If you have a war, you can't move it around. It's not worth anything. In fact, it's an obligation.
My personal experience was that land art or earth art was not an anti-gallery statement or anti-gallerist statement either, but that a wide open space is really what they were looking for and found. No gallery or museum could possibly do what the open space does for the individual, the viewer, the experiencer.
Bob Smithson, when he needed something that was of a scale that you can't do in an urban environment, he went to another environment. That scale did not exist physically in an urban space.
This is stuff that can only happen outside of the city. You couldn't do a spiral jetty in a city space. But Smithson brought it into the city, I think. It was the importation.
Northeast by north, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. West by south, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water.
And I wondered about that importation. I started to think, is this a way of trying to turn your back on the city? If you're turning back on the city and going to land, landscape, country, are you turning your back on people? And I started to think that I wondered how interested Michael Heitzer, etc., were interested in people. I think they were interested in the individual art doer can come into some kind of exchange with nature.
All right. So that is Troublemakers, the story of land art. And if you guys are interested in seeing that video, Public Library does have it in a digital format, and you can download it and watch it on your computers. Great resource. I mean, we have a wonderful public library system. All right, so land art is also known by a couple different names. Earthworks, earth art, sometimes known as environmental art, but that also has a couple other connotations to it. And it emerged in the 1960s and 70s, and there were predominantly a lot of American artists who were part of this, and some European artists. There were not a lot of, mostly from Great Britain. And the theory behind that, which I kind of found interesting, was that they were saying that it was because we have all of these wide open spaces in America that you can go and you can go in, and it's public land or it's private land, but a lot of these artists ended up purchasing the land in order to make these structures semi-permanent. and they were leaving the city and leaving the galleries. So some of them were more focused on the fact that they didn't want to put their work in galleries. Some of the artists were focused on the fact that they were going out to nature. But as with all artists, they all had different, kind of viewpoints and plans and reasoning for doing the work that they were doing. And it's kind of interesting that all these different varieties and reasonings behind this art all get grouped together because of their site-specific works. And a lot of the documentation for any of these is only through a photograph. One of the first places to actually show this work was at the Dwan Gallery in New York. The show was called actually Earthworks, and Virginia Dwan put it together, and a lot of notable names within the land art movement were part of it. But how do you take land art from places where they were building these on site? And Spiral Jetty was one of the ones that was actually featured. And how do you take that and document it? And that's what they were working with. And Judy, do you want to talk a little about Virginia?
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough to know Virginia. I have not been in touch with her for a while, but, and the odd thing is, I never asked her what prompted her to support land art. Duh, we talked about other things. But she was very instrumental in, I think she financed, I'm not sure, but I think she financed the Spiral Jetty. And she lived in LA at some point, and she had 2 galleries out there. And she also offered the opportunity for an artist, and I can't remember his name, who has these huge, huge crystals. They're faceted crystals. And at the, what is it, Elizabeth? In Las Vegas, New Mexico, there's a chapel that is amorphous and it has these crystals in it. And she was the one who sponsored that, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So I don't know. She's a lovely lady. She's probably about 90 now. And I'll tell you anyway. She lives in the Dakota in New York, and she took me out to lunch one day, and she felt comfortable enough with me to invite me back to where she lives to see her kitty, because we both like cats. And it was an amazing, amazing apartment with all this art. So anyway, she was really quite something, and quite an instrument.
She was and is, and it was actually, she was very groundbreaking at that time. Not only was she a woman owning a gallery in New York and LA, but she was willing to take the risks on experimental artwork. And land art, a lot of people think that land art came out of minimalism and conceptual art, and some say that, because Earth Day was first started on April 22nd, 1970, that's where we were also becoming more concerned with the Earth. There's also another, I like the other one, was when we first got a view of Earth from space, people started seeing the planet as an object, as more than just the ground we walk on. So there were a lot of, in the 1960s and 70s, but 1960s especially, there were a lot of upheavals and changes and groundbreaking art movements that influenced land art, and they were all part of that too, all kind of mixed together. It's funny, just about every single picture of most of the men who were working in the land art movement in the 1960s, all of those pictures when they were young, they have like a cigarette in their hand and they're posed just so. So I was like, oh, okay, well, this is a bit thematic. But when with also the Dwan Gallery and the Dia Art Foundation, Chinati Art Foundation, and a number of other ones, they're actually the Smithson and Holt Foundation now, are all supporting land art. And at this point, because land art has started to, the artists who are doing it are not as active, and there are not as many artists who are doing active large things of land art. There's only kind of 2 that are still going on. Michael Hertzer is still building his city out in Nevada. And that one's an interesting thing. If you go on Google Maps and look it up, you can actually see it. It's the only way you can see it because he has bought the land and you can't go on it. And actually in 2014, President Obama made it a national monument. So the federal government has protected it, which I was like, yay. He hasn't finished it, and he started it in 1972.
What's his name, Elizabeth?
His name is Michael Heiser. It's actually the artist who's featured here.
Yeah.
This is one of his pieces called Rift, which they actually went out into the middle of the desert. And these are, they're working on sites that are totally not usually considered habitable, or people don't want to. So there's a lot of pieces in the Southwest, Nevada, Utah, Texas has a number of them, especially the ones who are working with large excavations. Now, there was a bit of a schism between the British and artists who were making land art and the American artists who were making land art. Now, and you're going to see as I go through this, and if I forget to mention what it is, I will remind me in the Q&A, but I want you to see if you actually notice it. All right, so Robert Smithson actually came up with this word. He's called it site and non-site. So the pieces that were on site are what you see in this picture, which is the site. But the photograph or putting the artwork into the gallery is the non-site. So they actually came up with terms to define how photo documentation worked, which I thought was kind of interesting, because when I do installation work, I never really know what is the art. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is Christo and Jean-Claude. Most well known for wrapping things. This you'll see the Valley Curtain in Colorado, which is actually one of my favorites. I love listening to the noise on the videos. And down in the bottom, this one, the floating piers, is really neat because it actually was 3 kilometers of a pathway made out of saffron colored fabric. And they use the word saffron specifically because I guess that color is very important. The color obviously is very important to him, but saffron and pinks especially. And that one was 3 kilometer walk out to an island and back again, open to the public and free. The London Mastaba, which is based on the pyramids and other pyramid structures that are around the world, and influenced by that, that's actually made out of barrels, like oil barrels, I think. He and Jean-Claude have proposed a bigger one that's going to be their only permanent installation, that is going to be in Abu Dhabi, which will be a bigger mastaba. And their work is not permanent. They also don't make any money off of it. So we're gonna let we're gonna let Christo actually talk about it. Just so you know, Jean-Claude at this point has passed away, and Christo is working alone. He has been working alone since 2009. So when he finished the last piece they finished together was the gates. And here's a quote from them. "We are probably the only artists in the world who have a 2,000-page book on a work of art that doesn't exist. But in this way, these projects reveal their identity through this whole process. When I'm starting, I only have the slightest idea of how the work of art will exist. Now, Christo doesn't believe that their work is considered land art, but he gets grouped into this movement, just like all the other artists. And some of them don't even call their work land art, but yet we still see it. So this is Surrounded Islands in Miami that was done in 1983. And I have video from, this is from Art Basel back in 2018, when he revisited the site.
When we come to Florida, sometime in the late 70s, I never see so very flat land and so much water. Friend drive us to discover the Lake County, and we discovered these dotted islands from north to south. We decided that this can be done. All our projects have two distinct periods. The software period and hardware period. The software period when the project do not exist. It is only the drawing and the sketches and the presentation we use to get the permission. During that software period, the project developed his own identity.
Oh, wow.
We do not know what is Surrounded Island when we start. And these 3 years we learn what is Surrounded Island. And this is that, to that software period, the project built the energy and the expectation of the public. And this is why the hardware period, when the physical material moved to the space, started to build a project. The project developed something that I don't think any work of art has. For months of months, or years and years, 1,000 people try to think how the beautiful the project is. 1,000 people think how the awful, ugly the project is. There are not any work of art discussed before the work of art exists. This is for the first time we were in court and federal court of the United States to get the permission. The process was very controversial, very complex, and very difficult. Sorry, we disturb you.
This is a great honor. It's a
Not honor, a pleasure. I'd love to meet you. No, really. Okay, we can go now?
Yes, please. Let's go ahead.
In three, Miami was a pretty rough place. You know, a lot of the people in the city were migrating out west away from it. We had a lot of riots in the inner cities, the drug trafficking and the cocaine cowboy days. It really was a violent time for the city. Christo comes, he does this beautiful art installation of the Surrounding Islands. People start flocking to the bay, to the causeway, taking pictures, videos, and it just, I think it ingrains something in a lot of people on the magic of the city and what it could be in the future when you start investing in it.
So the island is called Beer Can Island because there's so much garbage. And I remember to remove 40 tons of garbage in the islands, of cans to cars, refrigerator, all kinds of things in the islands. Thank you very much. There you go. Okay, thank you. No, not nostalgic. Back to seeing. You know, like Chaplin was saying, we always like to be back at the site of the crime. I try to visualize, the fabric extending, if you see from there, about near 200 meters almost in the water. The project is done not by me, of course, done by the incredible team of professional people. And the biggest part is to create that team. Each island has its own captain. And that captain worked with about between 30 and sometimes if the island is too big to 100 people. Before the fabric comes, there are many things to be prepared. And the end of the fabric, we have a 12 inches, about 30 centimeter octagonal shell boom, was preventing the debris of the water from there. And there was a very intricate system of deciding that the fabric moved with a tide from the ocean up and down. One of the most important parts of all this project, we never do another surrounded island. Before everything, we have enormous pleasure to hunt.
Christo says he won't be making any money on all of this because he will not sell any photo rights to the Surrounded Islands project, and he has no financial interest in Christo's souvenirs.
I don't like to be involved with any commercial venture because I like to keep my credibility very high and very pure. The real water, the real wind, the real coal, the real miles and miles, the real things. This is why this project has that enormous energy, because it deals with the reality absolute.
That was Christo talking about his surrounded islands. And that project was just really kind of interesting. And the next slide that I had is actually news footage from the actually Miami, and we saw some of it in the video, but because I don't want to go over time, I'm not going to really show it. But what it was about talking about showing people just kind of converging and looking at the site. Unless you guys want to actually see that. Do you? Yes, no. Right. That's fine.
We got a lot of ground to cover.
I know. I'm like, oh, okay, come on, click. Okay, so this is Nancy Holt. She is actually one of my favorite artists. Nancy is a land artist in her own right, and saying that she is the wife of Robert Smithson is kind of, lessens her, but that it was the truth. But a lot of these pieces she made she was made after he had passed away. She likes spheres, and she likes utilizing astronomy into her work. So the one down the bottom is called Stone Enclosure, actually aligns with the North Star, and it has compass lines within it. The round one up at the top at Dark Star Park on, August 1st at 9:32 a.m. in the morning, the shadows from the sun line up exactly with the outlines on the ground.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was pretty much very scientifically inclined on this one. And it was very interesting to see her combining and working with astrophysicists and astronomers and construction engineers and everything like that. But the one I really want to talk about is called the Sun Tunnels. It's a very desolate area, but it is totally accessible, and it can be easily visited, making sun tunnels more accessible really than with our art in museums. Eventually, as many people will see, sun tunnels, you will eventually see sun tunnels as you see many artworks in the city, at least in the museum. So she wanted her work to be visible, and it is accessible, and it is free to the public, and she owns the land. She owned the land. It is now in the hold of her trust or her foundation. So these are the sun tunnels. There are 4 of them, and they line up with 2 of them line up with the winter solstice, and 2 of them line up with the summer solstice. There are holes inside of them, and each of the holes in the tunnels actually correspond to 4 different constellations. And this is Waldemar Jankusik, and we're going to see him a couple times, but I like him as a narrator. He's kind of fun.
Sunrise, tree break in the morning,
We did well. Got up this morning. You could see them about a mile away on the horizon. Sun tunnels. What's more, you can see why they're called the sun tunnels. Because the sun is just coming up now. Magic.
Sunrise, she bringing the morning. Sunrise, bringing the morning. Fluttering the skirts all around.
Two things I wasn't expecting. One, the colour. You see these in the daytime, and they look like inert slabs of concrete, the kind of stuff you see by the side of a motorway. But actually, they really fit the colours of the desert. It's clay soil stuff. Something falls on it, some colour. Look at that. You can see the reds inside that tunnel. And then all around us, there are these beautiful fields of ochre and yellow, and brown and khaki. Hundreds of different colours. It's just gorgeous. And the other thing, apart from me prattling on, there's no sound. Listen to that.
Yeah.
The sound of the sun tunnels.
Sunrise, oh, spreading all the light all around.
The thing about land art is that it isn't just about the bits in the middle, the stuff that Nancy Holt made and put down here in the desert. What land art does is it brings everything else into play. I was overwhelmed, she said, by the feeling of the sun. She said, if you come from the city, you don't really see the sun. But when you come out into the desert, the sun becomes everything. She came up with this piece, which for her was a way of framing and enfranchising the sun in the middle of the desert. And what she did, she took these 4 concrete tunnels. They're huge, they're 9 foot tall, and arranged them in the desert along the 2 lines, the winter solstice and the summer solstice. So this set of tunnels here is aligned with the summer solstice. That set of tunnels there is aligned with the winter solstice. We're not here on the perfect day. If we were here on the summer solstice, you would see the sun coming up right in the middle of the second tunnel, which I'm sure is really dramatic. So that's just here, Perseus. Named, of course, after that great Greek hero who slayed Medusa, gone with all the snake heads. He rescued Andromeda and the dragon. So the way this works is that when the sun comes over the tunnels, each of these beams throws a circle of light onto the ground. So what you'll be doing when the sun is right up there in the sky is literally walking over the stars. They'll be on the ground. You'll be walking over them. Delightful idea. And Nancy Holt, when she was planning this, she got a team of astronomers at work here. And all this is actually absolutely
to the centimetre. It's all perfectly aligned. One of the things I really like about land art is that it's always about these big subjects: the cosmos, summer solstice, the sun, the stars, big ideas. So much modern art is about cheap ideas. You know, it's about movies, it's about celebrity, it's about what's on TV, it's about what it's like to go shopping. Interesting, relevant ideas, cheap ideas, small ideas. Land art, it's impossible to make land art about celebrities and TV and going shopping. If you're making land art, you have to make art about this, about the big ideas. So of course it's no coincidence that most of the really good land artists are Americans. To make land art, you need all this.
All right, so that's Nancy Holt. If you want to read some more about her and her work, there's a book called Overlay, actually one of my favorite art history books, on contemporary art and the art of prehistory by Lucy Lippard. She's featured on the cover. All right, so I'm sure you guys have heard of Andy Goldsworthy. He is a British land artist, and he works on site-specific ones, where he will go to a site and kind of, figure out what the land is going to tell him to make today. He works in materials that are there. So we have ones that are made out of ice, out of stone, out of pieces of wood, sticks, leaves, thorns, all sorts of stuff. Here's a quote from him. "We often forget that we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we have lost our connection to nature, we lost our connection to ourselves." This is one of my favorite pieces by him. Mm-hmm. And it's actually done at Storm King in New York. If you guys haven't been there, it is a amazing place to visit. I have yet to get there, but I have watched many a video on it. It's a huge sculpture park, and Andy has a number of pieces there. There's also, he has a whole walking tour in the Presidio, and some in Provence in France. But he likes making these kind of like epic hikes and going through the nature. This is made out of sumac leaves. So he put it down, gathered all the leaves, made it, took a picture, and then it blew away. It was not there very long. Right.
One of the things I find fascinating about his art, and I'm sure everybody's seen that movie that was done a few years ago of his work, is it deteriorates. It goes back. And it's fascinating watching that process. And there was a show of his at Site Santa Fe a number of years ago. And it was, of course, it was enclosed in Site. And it was a different experience because it was created and then it was uncreated, but not in the same way as outside.
It's very interesting how, these ones, they call them mandalas. And a traditional mandala, when you put down the sand, the monks put down the sand, that sand, when they're done with the mandala, is gathered up and then usually, another one we did in New Mexico, they couldn't put into the sea. So they ended up putting it somewhere else. But it becomes put back into nature.
And museum in Minneapolis, the Walker. No, it's not the Walker. It's the one next to Minneapolis. They have a stabilized mandala that is on the wall. It was one of the big, I think it was 3M. They were allowed to stabilize it. And walking into the room where that is, you're just drawn right into it. If you haven't seen it, it is, I don't know if it's still there. I saw it maybe 15 years ago. It was absolutely amazing because seeing it on the floor is different than seeing it this way.
Yeah. Yeah, and this one is obviously on the ground. And it's only probably about 18, 20, 25 inches or so. It's not very big.
Wow.
They did record him making it. So we do have some of those videos on, there are a couple on YouTube. The one we're gonna watch though is actually him and Waldemar going on a hike and creating art on a site specific.
The Scottish borders, man's country. Here's the proof, looming out of the gloom. A gorgeous tower of muscular Scottish stonework that any Inca would be proud of. This fine cone of stone was made by the brilliant British land artist Andy Goldsworthy, who lives up here in the borders. I'm supposed to be meeting up with him tomorrow to make the new piece somewhere out here.
What's on the ground? Sounds remarkably long. You must have extra thick skin on the bottom of your feet. I love this cold. I can work anywhere, and there are great landscapes everywhere. You know, any landscape it can offer me something to work in. The people here have shown a great tolerance and at times interest in what I do. And you know, I don't work on my own fields. I only have a 6-acre field in front of my house. I depend on their goodwill to some extent, and their tolerance to allow me to work in these places.
It doesn't bother you that no one ever sees, or very few people ever see, this part of your work, the real part, the core.
You may think this is a fairly isolated, secluded spot. There are probably more people visit here than artist studios. You know, and at any time, a group of hikers, walkers, farmers can walk by me. And unlike in the studio, you can actually do what you're doing and come down and, you know, and examine it. So the intention with work like this is that I really don't know what I'm going to do. It's about looking and learning and seeing and responding to the day, the materials, and trying to understand a little bit of that day, that material, that place, that moment.
I'll be able to help you.
Well, once I decide what I'm doing, it may be so you can bring those couple of branches there that I just picked up. What's interesting about this whole place, it's a place that I actually walked by for many, many years. It doesn't seem a lot, but when you get inside of it, many of the trees here are dead, and eventually they fall and collapse. So there's a huge, heavy sense of death and decay in this place. The amazing thing is that when it falls, the elm trees fall into the water, they create these amazing waterfalls to be worked in. And because they're made not of rock but of branches, you can kind of stick things into it, which I could never do with a rocky waterfall. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to think of getting something that could be almost suspended miraculously in front of this water. To be honest, I think the chances of this succeeding are pretty slight. So, you know, that said, if you can try and find any curved, smallish branches, just look around at the elm.
Pieces like this.
Yeah, pieces like this, maybe whatever you can find.
As soon as said and done.
All right. It is driven fundamentally by intuition. This part of my work, you know, this is the food, this is the nourishment, this is what gives and feeds all the other things that I do in exhibitions, permanent works, outdoor installations, whatever. This is like the source. Oh, wow. Neat bar. That's you, isn't it? Marvelous. Perfect. That's what great. Just popping down there. Look at that. Find any more? You want some more? Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, and it's just, you know, all this decay that's created this place allowed me to make this. There's so much beauty come out of that process of change and decay. Every so often when you get a big flood, the whole landscape of the stream bed changes completely. There's such a huge sense of loss when you come to a place like this that I've worked in before and it's been washed away. You know, it's no longer there. Rocks that have been moved, trees that have been blown down. It's really unsettled, really unnerving. And then it all starts up again. Then it all starts up again, yeah. Never the same as before. Always a different place, you know? Good one, isn't it? I bet you're pleased with that. Yeah, I am actually.
So that was Andy Goldsworthy.
That was cool.
Yeah. I like the fact that that video actually happened building it and you could see the process.
Yeah.
Which is how, you know, I'm trying to pick videos that would actually kind of get process and also get you to understand the scale and space and stuff. So speaking about space, Robert Smithson, who is one of the, probably the most well-known of the land artists, and also the least prolific of the land artists. These are a couple of his pieces. The last piece, Amarillo Ramp up here, was actually finished by Nancy Holt because he passed away while surveying it. The plane that he was in, they were surveying the site, crashed. So he passed away in 1973. This is one of his pieces down at the bottom from the Yucatan, where they went down to Mexico, and it was actually kind of the start of his site work. And he was putting mirrors into the space, reflecting and reflecting and reflecting. And it also, that one came out about with the whole. They were also working with like the Panama Canal and it going back to Panama out of U.S. control. And there's a lot of history in this one. Broken Circle is one that was kind of like the sequel to, or a part of the series that was also with Spiral Jetty, as the same with Amarillo Ramp. And here's a quote from him. A work of art, when placed in a gallery, loses its charge and becomes a portable object or surface disengaged from the outside world. Now, Robert Smithson was very vocal on his belief that galleries were the place that was kind of sucking the soul out of art. And he wanted to create work, but he also wanted to make money. So in order to make money, you had to put art into the galleries. It was, that kind of push and pull. And so, that whole non-site and site that he coined the phrase for came up again. So here's Spiral Jetty from 1970. And Spiral Jetty is an interesting build because it was when they first put it together in 1970, it was fine. Then the water level rose and you couldn't see it. So for the longest time, we didn't know it. We knew it was there, but we didn't know it was there. And I have one last, I have two last videos. This one is actually conversations with Dr. Steven Zucker and Beth Harris about spiral jetting and their trip to spiral jetting. It's kind of neat.
In 1970, Robert Smithson hired several people to help him create spiral jetty. We're standing right in the middle, at the edge of the Great Salt Lake in Utah.
But we're not seeing this the way that it existed when Smithson first created it, where it was an intersection between the land and the very odd water of the Great Salt Lake.
This is a terminal basin, a huge lake that had been largely fresh water, but there is no outlet. So the water, once it flows here from rivers and streams, collects and then simply evaporates, which means that the water is dense with minerals.
And especially with salt, very much like the Dead Sea in the Middle East. And this is one of a handful of these terminal basins that exist in the world.
Almost nothing can live here. There are a few fish that live at the outlet of some of the freshwater rivers, and
there are brine shrimp and algae. In fact, there's a particular kind of algae that makes the water turn pinkish red, and that was true when Smithson created spiral jetty. But today, as we look out at the lake, it's blue.
With help from the Dawn Gallery, which represented him, Smithson was able to bring a front loader and dump trucks, a tractor, to help move these basalt stones and sand and some soil into place.
By creating a spiral, Smithson created lots of opportunities where the land and the water could meet one another.
But right now, because the American West is in the midst of a drought, the water has receded and is at a great distance from this earthwork.
So instead of the water filling the spaces in between the spiral, we have sand. So this was very much meant to be a work of art that changed based on natural principles.
Smithson was interested in the idea of entropy, the idea of the way things break down, and his intervention in this natural landscape. It's an expression of the way in which artists thought about the landscape for many years.
We could go back to artists like Caspar David Friedrich, who thought about the overwhelming size and power of nature and the smallness of man, and that's certainly one of the themes here for me as we stand here. But we could also think about the importance of the vastness of the American landscape in 19th century American painting, or even its importance to the abstract expressionists in the 1950s.
We can go even further back and look at the artwork of indigenous peoples in the Americas long before the Europeans arrived. The geoglyphs that are known as the Nazca lines in Peru in South America, or the earthworks that come out of the Fort Ancient culture in North America. And in fact, this very shape of spiral jetty is a form that has shown up in petroglyphs throughout the American West.
And it's a form that appears in nature quite frequently.
One of the anecdotes that Smithson apparently was aware of was this centuries-old idea that the Great Salt Lake contained a whirlpool that somehow connected it to the Pacific Ocean. So the idea of a spiral or whirlpool is active even in these stories that predate Smithson. But this is also a sculpture that is rooted in the 20th century, in an industrial culture. 1970 was the year of the first Earth Day, and that signaled an important early moment in the environmental movement. The idea of the ruination that man was visiting on nature is clearly informing work like this.
And Earth Day being a time when we reflect on environmental issues, but the relationship between the growing industrial nature of the United States and the amazingly beautiful, vast virgin landscape that was here when Europeans arrived is a theme throughout 19th century American painting. And as we stand here, we see mountains. We see this basalt that's formed from a volcano. So we have a very powerful sense of the passage of time that I think was very interesting to Smithson. By putting art outside in the world, it becomes part of the process of nature. It can't be conserved.
In 1970, this was still a radical idea, the idea of taking art off the wall, bringing it outside of the confines of a home or a museum.
And thereby outside of the commercial of a work that could be bought and sold.
Smithson was interested in creating a porous relationship between that more controlled gallery experience and the experience of art in the world. So can a work like this also exist in Manhattan? Can it also exist in a gallery?
Well, we did drive 2 hours from Salt Lake City, so one does have to make an intentional pilgrimage to see this. We're really in the middle of a vast, empty space in the American West.
And yet this artwork was not conceived of as existing only here.
There's a video, there are aerial photographs, and so like many works of art in the 1960s and 70s that were ephemeral, they exist through their documentation, although this still exists here also.
And I have to say, I wouldn't feel as if I had experienced this work of art fully had I not come out here.
Standing here looking at Spiral Jetty and being really aware of how different it is than when Smithson created it in 1970 really makes me think about museums as places where we entrust works of art. We lock them away from time. We conserve them and create special conditions to stop time from hurting them. But here Smithson created something that time is supposed to change.
Museums, in a sense, try to do the impossible, which raises a really interesting question. What do we do with the significant work of art that was intended to change over time? This work of art and the land that it sits on came under the control of the DIA Art Foundation. What does an institution like DIA do with something like this? Does it try to protect it? Does it allow natural and industrial forces to play with the landscape around it? And so what DIA did is, in concert with the Getty Conservation Institute, is to make the decision to regularly document this object.
You mentioned this idea of entropy, which was so important to Smithson, this idea that the tendency of all things, according to the laws of physics, is to move from order to disorder, to chaos. And I think we have that sense of things coming apart here.
So Smithson is imposing geometric order into this natural landscape, into this vast space that is in the process over millions of years of disassembling. But here, more specifically, we can see the way his intervention is slowly coming apart.
And I think that sense that over millions of years this will come apart makes us aware of the brevity of our own lives in the grandeur of time.
The spiral is one of the 5 basic symbols that's found all through art all over the world and long time.
Yeah.
And it in Native culture, Native American culture, it usually represents the spiral of life.
Mm-hmm. I use it in my own work, and that comes from the influence of the nautilus shell. How the nautilus shell spirals out, and each year is a section of growth. All right, so that was Robert Smithson.
Cool.
This I thought was kind of neat that you guys would like. So, Antique Roadshow was in Salt Lake City, and someone happened to have a collection of Robert Smithson work.
Check out this archive of a
This is our little
1,500 feet long
fluff
Utah
piece.
artwork.
So when I was a kid growing up in our house, we had a large photograph of the spiral jetty hanging in our house for as long as I can remember. It was a photo that my dad loved and that my mom didn't love quite so much. And it wasn't until I went to college and I was in an art history class and opened my art history textbook and saw the photo that was hanging in our family room for years and years and years.
Yeah.
That I went to my dad and said, "This is kind of a big deal, Dad." And when I showed him that, he went into his closet and took out a folder full of materials like this. Apparently 4 or 5 different contractors passed on the job because they didn't want to take their equipment out to the Great Salt Lake for fear of damaging it. He was the first one who accepted the job from Robert Smithson. He worked in construction for decades and built practical things, roads, gas lines, things like that. But for whatever reason, I think this was special enough to him or weird enough to him that he kept everything. He would tell stories all the time about how Smithson was very particular about going down with these big wooden lathes and then climbing back up the hill to look at where rocks were being placed. He was very particular, apparently, about the way it was constructed.
What we have here is the contract that your father had with Smithson, and there was some additional work.
Yeah, originally, as you can see on some of the sketches here, it was like a big J with an island in the middle. And after the project was completed, Smithson came back to my dad and said, "It's not quite right, it needs to be changed." And so he requested that it be turned into more of a spiral. So they did an additional change order for that was $3,000 additional dollars.
The thing about spiral jetty is soon after it was made, the water levels had risen. You couldn't see it until the early 2000s when a drought lowered the lake, and now it's become a pilgrimage spot for land artists, Utahns. It's kind of become a symbol of Utah, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a very special place for my family. We went out there just recently all together as a group, and the water level has receded so far that it's easy to just walk out all the way out surrounding where the jetty is.
Smithson was born in 1938, and he died in 1973 in a plane crash while surveying Amarillo Ram, only 3 years later. So what you have here are a variety of drawings with a variety of different detail. This one is a more general piece, and this is the second version of the spiral jetty. I would take it. This work has more of the landscape surrounding it. This one has some red pencil as well.
The red is my dad doing drawings and diagrams to sort of explain how things could actually be.
So the importance of having the proposal and having the photograph that was autographed to your father is that it authenticates the drawings, because the drawings themselves are unsigned. There are records of drawings of spiral jetty coming up and selling. There's a wide range. Works of this quality with all of the detail. So this work and the work in the center here, I would value at about $15,000 each, conservatively in a retail gallery. I would think that this would be more like $10,000 in a retail gallery. And this one, which I chose the first version and the second version, I would say would probably be about $7,500. So the collection altogether is $47,500.
That's pretty staggering. And that really would have delighted my dad. He passed away just earlier this year, and he would have been delighted just to have the work shown.
I just thought that was kind of a neat little.
That is cool.
Closing.
Very
Go
cool.
Antique Roadshow. And I have a thunderstorm over me. So, so next week, or not next week, but our next salon is going to be, Judy Lee Stern is going to be presenting it, and it's going to be Yayo Kusama. And if you guys are not familiar with her work, there was one of her infinity rooms in Tampa, I think in 2018. If you go see it.
Yeah.
I have pictures from it, so I can contribute that at least. All right, so I'm going to take us off screen sharing mode, and everyone can unmute themselves, and if you would like to discuss.
Oh, I unmuted you.
Elizabeth, would you be able to give the title of the book that you on Nancy?
Sorry, say again?
The title of the book that you had about Nancy, I wasn't able to get it down.
Okay. So it's called Overlay, Contemporary Art, and the Art of Prehistory. Actually, yeah, Brianna, you will love this book.
I heard, I was like, oh, I need to get that down.
Yeah. So the writer is Lucy Lippard. She was a art critic and art historian. Really good book. It's an old book, but it's a good book. Okay, so hopefully everyone can still hear me over the rain. But Judy, do you want to unmute yourself?
I am.
Okay, all right. So does anyone have any questions?
Very cool.
Discussions? I know. I love land art. I really do.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm sorry I was late.
No, we're happy to have you.
Well, I should ask separately. Did I miss somebody before Christo?
Somebody's.
No, he was the first one.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just kind of talked about the art the movement itself.
Oh, very cool. Land art. Never heard of the term land art. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
And you should call it something else, I think.
Judy? Lee?
What?
Judy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I thought that you should call it something else. Way back.
It has been called different things. It's called earth art, land art, earthworks, environmental arts sometimes. So it goes by a whole bunch of different names. But I think, remember what it is it's kind of just taking a whole genre and kind of grouping it all together. It's not a cohesive art movement similar to, Cubism. So, it is definitely not, there's not a whole prospectus and rules and everything like that.
But the artists themselves refer to themselves as land artists. They're aware.
No, not all.
Well, somebody did. Somebody did in one of the videos, and I can't remember who it was. Said something about
Michael Hertzer refers to himself as a land artist, and a lot of the American artists refer to themselves as land artists. There's one, Richard Long, who's a British artist. He does not like the word land art at all, and he will he pretty much flat out tells people no, I'm not a land artist.
What does he want to be called? What does he want to be called?
That's the thing, is when they asked him that, he's like, I want to be called an artist.
Like, do you want to be called a female artist?
Right. Right.
And it's interesting because some of the land artists are also part of the feminist art movement, because they're considered land artists because they're working outside in nature and using nature as part of their feminist art. So there's some really interesting things. There is another book, but this one's kind of a basic one. It's called Land Art, and it's by Taschen Press. The author is Michael Lailach.
Why do you like land art so much?
I like installation. We did Anish Kapoor before, and land art this time. They're things that I actually am fascinated by.
And what aspect are you fascinated by?
I love the fact that it's utilizing nature and it's a site-specific creation. A lot of my work for my thesis was one and done. You put it up and it's up, and I take photographs of it, and that's all I have left of it, other than bits and pieces. And so installation and that the idea of how to manipulate the environment towards your goal, or vice versa, how the environment manipulates you towards your goal, is just kind of a fascinating twist. And for me, being both a biologist and an artist, those things kind of go hand in hand. My walls as a teenager were covered in the whole environmental, save the seabirds, and endangered species and whales and whatnot.
So much about nature is impermanent. Like I'm telling you, I'm in Michigan right now, and within a day or two, my beautiful flowering trees, it's over. It's one rain, it's a blow, and all the beautiful pink petals are on my porch instead of in the tree. Nature is so impermanent, and that's why this art sort of so parallels the idea of real nature.
So they mentioned in that video about entropy. which is the idea that the universe is perpetually going into chaos, and that it's always unraveling itself, which is true. And that, you know, as humanity, we try and make these like permanent structures. The cities, our skyscrapers, a dam. I mean, as long as we're not in Michigan, so hopefully you're okay, Barbara.
Yeah, I'm near there, but that is devastating. That is unbelievably devastating.
And I think it's that push and pull of the whole, we have to control things, but also realizing that we can't control it. And that nature is a force unto itself. And that entropy of the universe is something that we can't really fight against it. And it's really, I find I enjoy actually embracing it more, which is why another reason I like the installation process is that things go wrong and things don't turn out exactly how one expects. You know, half of the time Andy Goldsworthy's pieces fall apart halfway through, or they melt. I like that idea of the impermanence of it, but in the realm of how do you become and how do you sell that, and how do you become a sustainable artist in the monetary sense? That's a question that I haven't yet figured out.
You know, we had the amazing piece in front of the new Sarasota Art Museum that was built by
the Stickworks, which was amazing to see. Yeah, and build.
And to be watched being built, and then to watch being unbuilt. You know?
Yes,
but those are supposed to just fall apart on their own, not be taken apart. So you do.
It fell apart on its own.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We had a tour of it as when he was installing it. One of the groups I went with, and he actually went and got source material. All of that, the sticks that he used were locally sourced out of the Sarasota and Bradenton area. So it was all natural materials, and that's what he prefers to use too. But he had to figure out, you know, how is this going to survive a hurricane? And he only gave it about a 5-year lifespan. It didn't last that long. Actually, one of the towers fell over first, and they had to cordon off it because it was unsafe. But it was that's exactly, you know, in Sarasota as we watch the entropy of the Stickworks. I miss seeing that piece.
Antithetical to Sarasota, where everything has to be.
Right. It is. We tend to glue everything together, don't we?
And within an inch of its life.
Right?
Yeah.
Forever statue of the kissing sailor. So
I want to say something quickly about the desert and why that is, to me, so successful in that environment, because it takes you somewhere else. And you don't have to work at going somewhere else. And that the one guy talked about the quiet, that's what I miss the most, because you've got in the desert and it is silent except for the wind. And a lot of times there's not even wind, and it is so magical. And I had a friend who came out to visit in Santa Fe one time. He was from New York, from Long Island. He couldn't stay. He felt so intimidated because it was open, and he was used to that. And he lasted about 2 weeks and never came back.
I think that's one of the biggest things I miss about New Mexico is the openness of the space, and that the roof was the sky, and the sky at night and the sky during the day.
Yeah.
And so land artists, unless they sell photographs or art books, or bring tours out, which I guess they don't do that.
No, they do in Marfa, Texas.
Sorry about that.
Step on it.
In Marfa, Texas, there's the Chinati Foundation, where Donald Judd and a number of the minimalists work is housed. Let's see, Flavins and another. I know them. They're the Crushed Cars, but I mean those works are protected and sustained by foundations.
But unlike performance artists who can perform for people,
yes,
unless, you know, I mean, how do people know of them other than people like you or like I said, the art books or the media?
Well, I'm trying to think. So
Or
when I
do they
first
not
learned
care?
about,
Or
yeah,
do they
well,
not-
no, when I learned about land art, actually, it was in high school when my art teacher gave me overlay. She's like, here, you need to read this. You keep doing these things that are like, you know, are you working with animals? Are you working with totems? Are you where are you going with this? And it was kind of like, you know, how did we not know about it? Well, the reason we don't really know about it is because it's not as prevalent. But, you know, Maya Lin is included as a land artist. The wall that she created in the Vietnam Memorial is considered land art because of the way she conceptualized it. And so one of the other things that comes up with land art is it architecture or is it art? Is it sculpture? What is it? How do you define it when it has such a broad spectrum?
But they're perfectly happy not to be defined, isn't that?
They definitely are. They're like, please don't pigeonhole
Yeah.
me into this.
Which is why
movement.
they're not in galleries with walls and.
Yeah. Well, they do exhibit in galleries, but again, what they're exhibiting are the photographs. So, I mean, you could say that Ansel Adams, when he was out taking photographs of Yosemite or Abiquiu, he was there, you know, on site. So the non-site pieces are his photographs that everyone puts into calendars and we see on walls and whatnot. Or Clive Butcher.
But he didn't arrange things. He arranged his photograph, but he didn't move things around to create. It's a big difference, I think.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, and Andy Goldsworthy.
But it's still that documentation. Sorry, Judy.
Okay. Andy Goldsworthy did have a show at Site Santa Fe, so it was done in a museum experience, but it had a different feeling to it than seeing it where it was, you know, in the land. And there's a house out there that I heard is incredible. It's all glass, really thick glass, floor to ceiling, and they have they commissioned him to come out and do one of his pieces in their yard. Tough.
Funny, you don't think of land art as this as being commissionable kinds of pieces. I don't think of this as being commissionable kinds of pieces, you know, come make a mountain or come make a waterfall, or
if you got enough money, why not?
I guess. I mean, Christo, you know, he brought color and fabric and, you know, unnatural things. So so the media followed him because it was.
He is definitely not I do commissions. I only do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And Andy Goldsworthy is the same way. I mean, they may invite him to come and do a site-specific work there, but he tells them what he wants to do. Not them saying, he's like, okay, well, we would like one of your rock Karens and we want it right here. And he doesn't do that. So.
And I just want to say that Christo, when it was after the show, a friend of mine who lives in New York, actually the woman who invented Akua printmaking inks, she had a little piece of the
flag
from that show.
It's the orange.
Yeah.
They were giving those out.
Yeah.
Christo, and what's her name?
Jean-Claude.
Jean-Claude. When you were in Central Park, they took a golf cart and rode around Central Park on a regular basis and were handing those pieces out, the little orange pieces out, because I got several.
I wondered where that came from, how it was gotten, because they don't sell them.
No, and if you happen to know someone who's an artist and who likes Christo, my daughter-in-law happens to, so I gave them to her and she framed them.
Yeah.
Framed them. That's cool.
So, it's always fun when you're there and the artist is there.
Yeah, well, and Christo is one of those ones where they've always made sure that they sell the sketches, they sell preliminary things. You'll see wrapped chairs or other objects, and the funding from those sales is what funds their big projects. But their projects also are, they don't happen in a fast manner. I mean, it's years in negotiations and trying to find the right space, and it's kind of crazy.
And some of these things were not expensive because I have purchased some of the sketches or prints, I think they were, and they were not terribly expensive. So he would have to sell a lot to finance the work he was doing.
Well, he also takes out loans, so that's the bulk of everything.
Well, it's too bad he's not around now. He can get a lot of loans. Is that your thunder or my thunder?
That's my thunder.
I have it too. I'm looking out at just a sheet of rain.
Yes. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? If not, we'll wrap this up. And
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I went on Wikipedia and looked up land art, and they had a list of contemporary land artists, and it was 42 names, and only 8 of them were women. And Elizabeth, you're going to be the 9th. Oh, no, okay. But I thought it was kind of sad, and I know that it's an expensive art because you not only have the expense of all that earth moving equipment, but then you have to have the expense of the photography.
Yeah. Well,
you have the expense of your own.
The neat thing about that is that land art has, at this point, it is kind of transcending into public art. So a lot of the public artwork that we see now, it is what a lot of the land artists are doing, and there are there are not a lot of them, but there are a number of women contemporary land artists and public artists. So yeah. I swear, every time I see Nancy Holt's face, I'm like, I have met her somewhere, and it is possible. Who knows? Brianna, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was looking at the site, and I didn't see yet on the Sarasota site. I wasn't sure where to look, but the date of the next Salon meeting.
The next Salon is going to be June 5th. I haven't put it up because Judy and I just confirmed it.
Oh, okay. I was like, where?
This afternoon. But no, thank you. I appreciate that. So next Salon is on June 5th from 4 to 5. It will be Yayo Kusama. And so everyone wear their polka dot shirts.
Oh. You're already running the game.
I know. I this is my preemptive subliminal messaging, right?
So we got to go on Amazon and get a polka dot shirt to do this.
Yeah, that would be, we're gonna have a photo bomb. That's what it is.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
You're welcome. Thank you. And remember that please support Art Center Sarasota if you enjoyed this programming, to give us a donation. And we're continuing this. It's going to continue throughout, even though we are going to be opening up again, but we will continue to do Zoom meetings. The book club will continue every Monday, as will Salon. We may go back to having Salon in the space too, but you know, I think we should continue doing the Zoom stuff too. What do you guys feel on that?
I agree with you.
It's great. This is fun. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Good. No, thank you. This is fun.